So, you flip a switch, the lights come on, and then at the end of the month, you just pay a bill.
Right. It's just this flat rate for most of us.
Yeah, exactly. For the vast majority of consumers, that flat, predictable, per kilowatt hour rate is the entire extent of their relationship with the electrical grid.
It's all they ever see.
Right. But if you're managing industrial loads or developing renewable energy projects, or maybe you're trading power, you know that this smooth monthly average on a residential utility bill is basically a complete fiction.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally smoothed out.
It is. It's this massive financial shock absorber, and it's hiding one of the most volatile, mathematically complex marketplaces ever devised. So, have you ever stopped to wonder how the exact price of the electricity flowing to your specific location, like at a specific millisecond, is actually calculated by the grid operator?
It's a question that completely upends how we traditionally think about commodities.
How so? Like, compared to other stuff we buy?
Well, yeah. If you buy a barrel of oil or, say, a ton of copper, the underlying physical asset has a price that might fluctuate daily, right, based on global supply and demand.
Sure.
But electricity on a wholesale grid, it cannot be stored easily in massive quantities, and it must be consumed the exact instant it is produced.
The exact instant.
Right. That means the price isn't just a reflection of financial speculation. It is a real-time, algorithmic reflection of physical infrastructure, shifting weather patterns, and the literal laws of thermodynamics acting on thousands of miles of wire.
Which is just wild to think about.
Ugh.
And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are looking at a technical document simply titled LMP.PDF, which it outlines the pricing mechanics used by major grid operators.
Like the California Independent System Operator, or KISO?
Exactly. So our goal today is to decode this single, powerful equation at the heart of this document. It's called the Locational Marginal Price. We're going to unpack all the hidden economic, physical, and environmental forces that basically dictate the price of power on the grid.
It's a huge topic.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because we aren't just talking about a flat rate today. We are exploring how a continent-spanning machine tries to balance power at the speed of light, all while navigating physical bottlenecks and invisible regulatory borders.
To really grasp this, you have to discard the mental image of the grid as just one giant, undifferentiated pool of energy.
Like a big bathtub of electricity.
Exactly. It's not a bathtub.
Yeah.
The wholesale market doesn't trade in a generic price of power. It trades in locational marginal prices, or LMP.
Okay, LMP.
Yeah. The LMP is the total price of delivering exactly 1 megawatt-hour of energy to a highly specific location on the grid, which we call a node, at a specific given time.
Wait, so it's that specific?
It is. It's the literal market clearing price. It's what is actually paid to generators or charged to wholesale buyers at that exact physical spot.
Okay, so let's drill into this concept of a node before we even look at the math, because it sounds like the geography of this market dictates literally everything else.
It really does. Geography is destiny on the power grid.
Right. So I know there isn't just one price for California or Texas, but how granular are we actually getting here? Are we talking about a price for a county, a city, a specific neighborhood?
Well, we are talking about specific injection and withdrawal points on the high voltage transmission system.
Okay, injection meaning power plants and withdrawal meaning load.
Exactly. So a node, or more accurately in CAISO's terms, a pricing node or P node, could be a specific substation where transmission lines step down voltage to serve a local utility.
Right.
Or it could be the specific point where a new 500 megawatt solar facility physically connects to the grid.
So every power plant has its own price tag, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
In a market like CAISO, there are over 10,000 of these distinct pricing nodes.
10,000.
Yep, over 10,000. And the grid operator's market optimization software is calculating a unique price for every single one of those nodes every 5 minutes, 24 hours a day.
Oh, wow. 10,000 individual prices recalculated every 5 minutes. The computational weight of that is staggering.
It's a massive math problem.
I have to ask the structural question here. Why do we even need nodal pricing? Historically, didn't a lot of markets try to use zonal pricing? Like just splitting a state into a north zone and a south zone?
They did, yeah.
So why undergo this massive computational headache of tracking 10,000 different nodes?
Well, because treating a massive, physically constrained grid as a single zone, or even just a handful of zones, completely ignores the reality of physics. And that ignorance creates devastating market inefficiencies.
Really? Like what?
We saw this in the early days of deregulated electricity markets. If you have a single zonal price, you are basically assuming that power can flow freely from any generator in that zone to any consumer in that zone.
Without hitting a physical limit.
Right, without any physical limit. But what happens when there's a bottleneck?
Right, if you have a massive, I don't know, nuclear plant in the north, but the transmission lines heading to the load centers in the south are physically maxed out, I mean, it doesn't matter how cheap that northern power is, you just can't get it there.
Precisely. You literally can't squeeze more power through the wire. So in a zonal market, the operator would have to manually intervene.
Oh, like pick and choose plants.
Yeah, they'd have to pay expensive generators near the load centers to turn on out of market and then socialize those extra costs across everyone. It created massive opportunities for market manipulation.
Ah, of course.
So nodal pricing, which eventually emerged as the gold standard in market design, forces the financial reality to match the physical reality.
So the money matches the physics.
Exactly. By calculating the marginal cost to serve load at every specific node, the price signal instantly reveals exactly where power is abundant and where it is critically scarce.
Okay, so think of a node, like your exact home address when you're ordering food delivery on an app.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. The LMP is the final total on your receipt, but that final number is actually made up of a bunch of hidden line items depending on exactly where you live.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how the total price, the LMP, is actually a four-part mathematical equation.
All right, we saw this in the document.
Yeah, the equation is LMP equals MCE plus MCC plus MCC plus MCL plus MGHG.
Okay, so LMP equals MCE plus MCC plus MCL plus MGHG. I want to take these apart piece by piece, starting with the absolute foundation, the MCE.
Right, the MCE, which stands for the Marginal Cost of Energy.
And this is basically the base energy price, right?
Yes, the document defines it as the cost of the next cheapest megawatt-hour available system-wide.
Okay, wait, so if it's system-wide, this is the baseline.
It is the absolute baseline.
If I'm looking at my delivery receipt analogy, is this just the flat cost of the burger itself before any delivery fees or taxes are added on?
Yes, that is exactly it. Crucially, this is the cost before any location-specific effects are applied.
So no geography involved yet.
None. The intuition for MCE is simply asking the fundamental question: what does raw energy cost in general at this very moment across the entire system?
Okay, so how do they actually figure that out?
Well, the grid operator knows they need, say, 30,000 megawatts for the next 5-minute interval.
Right, based on weather and demand forecast.
Exactly. So they looked at all the bids submitted by every single power plant in the system.
The solar farm's bidding $0.
The wind farm's bidding negative, the nuclear plants, the highly efficient combined cycle gas plants, all the way up to the dirty, ancient peaker plants.
And they just stack them up.
They stack those bids from cheapest to most expensive until they hit exactly 30,000 megawatts. This is the classic supply stack or merit order dispatch.
Okay, makes sense. You buy the cheap stuff first.
Right. And the crucial mechanism here, the actual engine of marginal pricing, is that the very last, most expensive plant required to meet that 30,000 megawatt demand sets the MCE for the entire system.
Wait, really? The most expensive plant?
Yes. So if the last unit selected is a gas peaker plant bidding $75 per megawatt hour, the system MCE is $75.
I have to push back on this.
Go for it.
Because if I'm an industrial consumer, I'm looking at that and thinking, why should a fully depreciated nuclear plant or a solar farm whose fuel is literal free sunlight get paid $75 peaking gas plant prices?
It does seem counterintuitive.
It seems like a massive artificial inflation of consumer costs designed purely to pad generator profits. Why not just run a pay-as-bid market?
So everyone gets what they ask for.
Yeah. The solar farm gets its $0 bid, the gas plant gets its $75 bid, and the consumer just pays the weighted average of the whole stack.
It looks highly inequitable on the surface, which is exactly why politicians and regulators frequently propose switching to a pay-as-bid market, especially after major price spikes.
Yeah, I'm not crazy for thinking that.
You're not crazy. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of game theory and market design, pay-as-bid actually destroys market efficiency and can end up costing consumers a lot more.
How is that mathematically possible? If you
No.
pay people less, the average price should drop.
Because you are assuming generator bidding behavior remains static.
Oh.
Right. In a uniform clearing price market, which is what the MCE represents, a generator is heavily incentivized to bid their true marginal cost.
Because they know they'll get the clearing price anyway.
Exactly. If a solar farm did $0, they are guaranteed to be dispatched, and they know they will receive whatever the market clearing price happens to be.
Right.
But imagine we switch to pay-as-bid. That same solar farm knows the gas plant is probably going to bid $75.
Ah.
Why on earth would the solar farm continue to bid $0?
They wouldn't. They would guess the margin. They would bid like 74.99 cents.
Exactly. In a pays-bid market, every single generator stops bidding their actual operational costs and instead starts playing a massive guessing game to predict the marginal clearing price.
That sounds like chaos.
It is. The grid operator entirely loses visibility into the true cost of operating the system. And furthermore, smaller generators who can't afford massive quantitative trading desks to predict the margin, they get squeezed out by larger portfolios.
So the uniform clearing price is actually a feature, not a bug.
Yes. The uniform MCE ensures transparent price discovery, encourages everyone to bid their actual lowest cost, and crucially provides the massive price signals necessary to incentivize building new, cheaper generation.
Right. If developers see a market frequently clearing at $75, they know a new, highly efficient $40 plant will make a killing.
Exactly. Which eventually drives the overall MCE down over the long term.
Okay, that makes sense from an investment perspective. But let's look at the bizarre reality of modern grids right now, especially ones heavily saturated with renewables, like CAISO or ERCOT in Texas.
The duck curve.
The duck curve. We aren't just seeing $0 bids anymore. We are regularly seeing negative bids.
Yes, quite frequently.
So how does the MCE handle a situation where the system marginal cost is literally below zero?
This is one of the most fascinating distortions in modern energy economics. A negative MCE means generators are literally paying the grid operator to take their power.
Which just sounds insane.
It does. This usually happens during the belly of the duck curve, which is usually mild spring days.
Right, when solar production is absolutely staggering, but human demand for air conditioning or heating is virtually non-existent.
Exactly. The system has more generation than load, and traditional baseload plants like nuclear, they can't simply turn off and on quickly.
But wait, why would a wind or solar farm actively pay to generate? Why not just, feather the turbine blades or disconnect the inverters and output zero? It's better than losing money?
Well, because they are actually losing money.
Wait, really?
Yeah, because of out-of-market subsidies, primarily the Federal Production Tax Credit, or PTC.
Oh, the tax credits?
Right. A wind farm might receive a tax credit of roughly $25 for every megawatt hour it successfully generates and puts onto the grid.
I see where this is going.
So from their economic perspective, their true marginal cost isn't zero, it's negative $25.
Wow. So if the wholesale market price drops to negative $10.
They are still netting a $15 profit per megawatt hour because of that tax credit. They will continue to bid negative, driving the system MCE below zero and forcing non-subsidized, inflexible plants to bleed money just to stay online.
That is just wild. Okay, so the MCE is our baseline. It's the economic equilibrium of the entire footprint, capturing everything from zero marginal cost solar to expensive peaking gas, all competing in a single stack.
That's a perfect summary.
But as we know, energy doesn't just magically teleport from a power plant to your node. It has to travel. And that travel brings us to the second variable in our equation, the MCC.
Right, the marginal cost of congestion.
So what is this exactly?
This is an extra cost, or, importantly, sometimes a credit applied, because transmission limits force power to slow on costlier paths to reach the specific node.
Okay, so this is where geography and infrastructure finally come into play.
Exactly. The grid has limited capacity, just like a highway system. The intuition here from the source document is, how much more or less does energy cost because this node is hard to reach due to grid constraints?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about a GPS navigation app during rush hour.
Oh, good analogy.
Right. Like if the main highway is completely jammed, which is basically a transmission limit,
Yeah.
the app reroutes you through a longer, slower back road.
Yep.
The MCC is basically the price of having to take the long, expensive detour to get the power to your node.
That's exactly what's happening. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we realize that the physical limitations of our transmission wires actively distort the base price of energy, the MCE.
So grid constraints literally manifest as financial premiums in real time.
Yes. But I want to get granular on the physics of this traffic for a second.
Please. When we say a transmission line is congested, what is actually happening to the physical wire?
Well, there are a few different types of transmission constraints, but the most common one is a thermal limit.
Thermal, so heat.
Right, heat. High-voltage transmission lines are primarily made of aluminum wrapped around a steel core. As you push more electrical current through that wire, electrical resistance generates heat. If you push too much current, The temperature of the wire rises, the metal physically expands, and the line actually begins to sag between the transmission
Oh,
towers.
wow. And if it sags too much, it arcs into a tree, causes a short, and trips the line offline.
Exactly. And that can cascade into a massive blackout.
So the grid operators have hard megawatt limits on every single line to prevent catastrophic thermal failure.
Exactly. So the optimization software running the market is constantly monitoring the state of the grid.
In real time.
Yes. Let's say the MCE is low because there's a massive amount of cheap wind blowing in an isolated region. The algorithm wants to dispatch all that wind and send it to a major city.
Because it's the cheapest.
Right. But as the algorithm simulates the power flows, it sees that doing so would push a specific 230 kilovolt transmission line to, say, 101% of its thermal limit.
It's going to sag into a tree.
Exactly. The algorithm cannot violate physics. It must constrain that cheap generation.
So it tells the wind farm, stop, we can't take any more of your power. But the city still needs that electricity. The demand hasn't changed. So what does the algorithm do?
It has to perform what's called an out-of-merit dispatch. It has to look geographically closer to the city on the load side of that congested transmission line.
Inside the bottleneck.
Yes, and it has to find a generator that can turn on to meet the demand without putting power onto the overloaded line.
And almost inevitably, this generator will be more expensive.
Almost always. Perhaps an older natural gas plant that bid $80 while the constrained wind farm was bidding $10.
And here is where the math of the MCC materializes, right? The base energy price, the MCE, might still reflect that there is plenty of cheap power system-wide.
It does.
But for the specific nodes inside that city, the system had to spend an extreme premium to bypass the bottleneck.
Yes. The MCC for those city nodes will spike, representing the difference between the cheap energy the system wanted to use and the expensive energy it was forced to use because of the transmission constraint.
So they are essentially trapped.
In market terms, we call the city a load pocket. The transmission congestion acts like a wall, isolating the city from the broader competitive market and temporarily creating a localized monopoly for the generators inside that pocket.
You know, this sounds like an absolute dream scenario for a manipulative energy trading firm.
Oh, it has been in the past.
Like if you own the expensive gas plant inside the load pocket and you know the transmission line frequently congests on hot afternoons, couldn't you just bid like $900 a megawatt hour, knowing the grid operator has absolutely no choice but to dispatch you to keep the lights on?
You've just described the exact vulnerability of nodal pricing. It's called locational market power.
Wow.
If a generator knows they are the only physical option to resolve a constraint, they can economically hold the grid hostage.
So how do they stop that?
This is why entities like KISO have incredibly complex market power mitigation algorithms. Before the final LMP is even calculated, the software analyzes every single transmission constraint. If it determines a constraint is non-competitive, meaning only a few generators can actually resolve it, the software will automatically intervene.
It just steps in.
It steps in, rejects their $900 bids, and substitutes them with cost-based reference bids, effectively capping their profits based on their actual fuel costs.
That is wild. The algorithm is simultaneously solving for thermodynamics and policing corporate extortion in real time.
It's a very busy piece of software.
No kidding. But earlier, you mentioned that MCC can also be a credit. We know what it looks like inside the expensive load pocket, but what does the MCC look like on the other side of the wall where all that wind power is trapped?
What's fascinating here is how the price signal flips entirely.
Okay.
On the export side of the congested line, you have a massive surplus of local supply and a physical inability to export it.
Because the line is full.
Right. To keep the local grid stable, the operator desperately needs load to increase or generation to decrease. So the MCC at those nodes goes violently negative.
Wow.
The LMP drops below zero, penalizing generators for producing and essentially paying consumers, if they have the capability, to soak up the trapped energy.
So the MCC is really the ultimate spatial price signal. Like a high positive MCC is screaming at grid planners, build a new transmission line here, or build a massive battery in this city.
Yes, it's a huge neon sign for investment.
And a deeply negative MCC is screaming to heavy industry, build a data center right next to this wind farm because power is perpetually trapped and practically free.
Exactly. In the long run, the volatility of the locational marginal price is what directs billions of dollars of capital allocation for infrastructure.
That makes total sense.
And there's even an entire financial derivatives market, financial transmission rights, or congestion revenue rights, where traders essentially place bets on the future spread of MCCs between two nodes to hedge against this exact spatial volatility.
Okay, so we have the base system pulse, the MCE. We have the localized traffic jam penalties, the MCC.
But even if there is absolutely no congestion on the grid, even if the lines are totally clear, there is still a physical toll exacted on the power as it moves.
Yes, distance is not free.
And that brings us to the third component of our equation, MCL, the marginal cost of losses.
Right. The document defines this as the adjustment for electrical losses, specifically heat, as power travels through lines to reach a node.
Okay, so the grid literally sweats out power.
It really does. If you want to understand the MCL, you have to understand that on the power grid, distance is a physical tax.
If I'm ordering that burger from our earlier analogy, this is like the delivery driver taking a bite out of my fries on the way over, and I have to pay a premium to ensure a full order actually arrives at my door.
That is painfully accurate, yes.
But I'm stuck on the physics of this heat loss. Like, if I push 100 megawatts into a high-voltage transmission line in Nevada, why doesn't exactly 100 megawatts come out the other end in Los Angeles? It comes down to the fundamental properties of conductive metals and electrical current. No practical transmission line is a perfect superconductor.
Right, it's just aluminum wire.
Yes. As electrons are pushed through the atomic structure of an aluminum or copper wire, they encounter resistance. This resistance converts a portion of the electrical energy into thermal energy, which simply radiates away into the atmosphere.
It just disappears.
It is known as Joule heating. The energy literally evaporates into thin air. Across a large interconnect, these line losses can consume anywhere from 2% to 6% of all the electricity generated by power plants.
That is a staggering amount of wasted fuel and energy when you look at the scale of the grid.
It is huge.
But how does that translate into a marginal cost for a specific node? Let's say I'm an industrial facility operating at a node 200 miles away from a baseload power plant, and I decide to increase my demand by exactly 1 megawatt.
Okay, if you demand 1 extra megawatt, the power plant 200 miles away cannot simply increase its output by exactly 1 megawatt.
Because of the fries being eaten?
Exactly. Because of the resistance over that 200-mile journey, if they generate 1 megawatt, only 0.96 megawatts might actually reach your node. So to deliver the full unit you requested, the grid operator has to dispatch the plant to produce 1.04 megawatts.
So the system has to generate extra phantom power just to feed the frictional heat loss of the wire between point A and point B.
Precisely. And that extra 0.04 megawatts costs money. Fuel has to be burned, or turbines have to spin harder to produce energy that will never do any useful work.
Wow.
The MCL calculates the financial cost of that extra generation required to overcome the thermal losses on the specific path to your specific node. It is a spatial penalty. The further you are from the generation center, the higher your MCL will be.
But I want to ask about the volatility of this. Why does it change hour by hour? Is the loss rate not just a fixed percentage based on the physical miles of wire? Like, does the distance tax get worse based on how much power is flowing?
This raises an incredibly important point about grid physics. Electrical losses are nonlinear.
Nonlinear, what do you mean?
The physical formula for power loss is current squared multiplied by resistance. I squared R.
Okay, bringing back high school physics.
Right. That exponent is the key. It means that as you double the amount of power flowing through a transmission line, the thermal losses don't double, they quadruple.
Oh, wow. Wait, really?
Yes. So if a line is lightly loaded in the middle of the night, the losses are negligible. But if that same line is heavily loaded on a Tuesday afternoon during a massive heat wave, it is bleeding off heat at an accelerating exponential rate.
That is crazy. This makes the marginal cost of losses highly dynamic. During peak hours, when lines are totally stuffed with current, the thermal losses must skyrocket.
They absolutely do. The grid has to dispatch increasingly expensive marginal generation just to cover the exponential heat loss.
And so the MCL component of the LMP spikes dramatically to reflect this. The math is constantly penalizing long-distance power transfers during peak load.
Exactly. Which fundamentally shapes grid topology.
How so?
It creates a massive economic incentive to locate generation as physically close to load centers as possible.
Oh, I see. It's the constant tension between building a massive, cheap solar array out in the desert where land is cheap, but MCL will be huge, versus building a more expensive, smaller gas plant right inside the city where land is expensive, but the MCL is basically zero.
The optimization engine calculates all of this simultaneously. It assigns a marginal loss factor to every node, determining exactly how an injection or withdrawal at that location impacts the total thermal losses of the entire system, and prices it accordingly.
Incredible. Okay, so we've covered the base energy cost, the transmission bottlenecks, and the thermodynamics of wire resistance. For a long time in market design, that was the entire equation, right? LMP equaled MCE plus MCC plus MCL.
For a long time, yes, that was it.
But our source document introduces a fourth variable. And this one isn't born from physics or raw supply and demand. It's born from policy. We need to unpack MGHG.
The marginal greenhouse gas cost.
Right. So what does the document say about this one?
The document defines MGHG as the cost associated with greenhouse gas compliance for energy serving a node. It specifically notes that this is mainly relevant for the EIM, or energy imbalance market, and import paths. This is where the physical reality of the grid completely collides with jurisdictional boundaries and environmental policy.
The regulatory border.
Right.
Which is tricky, right? Because if we're talking about a continent-spanning grid, electrons do not carry passports.
They certainly do not.
The electrical grid doesn't care where Nevada ends and California begins.
No, it's just a continuous copper plate to the electricity.
Right. So I'm thinking, how much more does power cost because of carbon compliance on the path to this node? If I'm drawing power in California, a state with strict carbon pricing and cap-and-trade compliance, from a shared grid connected to Utah or Wyoming, which might not have those policies, how on earth does an algorithm police the carbon footprint of an indistinguishable electron?
It is one of the most complex accounting challenges in modern power markets. To understand it, we have to look at the concept of carbon leakage.
Carbon leakage.
Yeah. If California imposes, say, a $30 per ton cost on carbon emissions for power plants inside its borders, the internal MCE will rise.
Right, because gas plants in California have to buy allowances, which raises their bid.
Exactly, which makes California power look artificially expensive compared to neighboring states.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If there was no border adjustment, utilities in California would simply stop buying power from the clean but expensive in-state plants and massively increase imports of cheap, unregulated coal or gas power from neighboring states.
So the global carbon emissions wouldn't decrease at all. They would just shift across the state line.
Exactly. That is carbon leakage. To prevent this, regulators dictate that any power imported into the carbon-regulated zone must have a greenhouse gas compliance cost applied to it.
But again, I come back to the physics. If I buy 100 megawatts from the out-of-state pool, how does the KISO market algorithm know if I'm importing clean Idaho hydropower or dirty Wyoming coal power? How does it assign a specific carbon cost?
Well, it can't track the physical electron. It relies on a mathematical framework known as deemed delivered.
Deemed delivered.
Right. When out-of-state generators participate in the wider market, they submit their energy bids, but they also submit a separate GHG bid adder if they are willing to have their power deemed as being imported into California.
Okay.
The optimization algorithm looks at the entire multi-state system. It mathematically pairs specific out-of-state generators with specific in-state load based on economics.
So it's a financial contract, not a physical electron trace.
Correct. If the algorithm deems that an out-of-state gas plant is serving California load, the MGHG cost is applied to that specific path. The importer has to pay for the carbon allowances associated with that specific generator's emission rate.
This raises an important question, though, because, regardless of where anyone stands on environmental regulations, doesn't this create a massive loophole?
How do you mean?
Well, let's say a utility in Nevada owns both a coal plant and a solar farm. If California wants to import power, couldn't the Nevada utility just say, oh, sure, all the power we are sending to California is from our solar farm, so zero MGHG cost?
Right.
Meanwhile, they just redirect all their dirty coal power to serve their own local Nevada customers. The total emissions of the grid haven't changed by a single ounce, but on paper, California looks completely clean.
You have just perfectly described the phenomenon of resource shuffling.
Resource shuffling?
Yes, it is the most persistent criticism of the MGHG mechanism. The market optimization will naturally select the lowest emitting resources outside the state to be deemed delivered to the regulated state, minimizing the MGHG cost.
Because it's the cheapest way to do it.
Exactly. But as you noted, if those clean resources were already running to serve out-of-state load and are merely being reassigned on paper, there is no actual reduction in atmospheric carbon.
So what do regulators do about that?
They are in a constant arms race. They are always updating the market algorithms and setting baseline emission hurdles to try and prevent resource shuffling. But it remains a profound challenge of applying localized policy to an interconnected physical system.
Still, regardless of how perfectly it prevents leakage, the very existence of the MGHG variable is a fascinating piece of transparency.
It really is.
Because it takes environmental policy, which is usually debated in these abstract political terms, and translates it into a mathematically precise toll booth on the wholesale grid. It isolates exactly what compliance is costing the system at any given node.
It is the ultimate quantification of policy intersecting with physics. By separating the LMP into these four components, MCE, MCC, MCL, and MGHG, the grid operator is essentially providing a diagnostic readout of the entire macroeconomic and physical state of the continent.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a really mundane, everyday action, right? Flipping a switch and paying a flat monthly bill.
The illusion of simplicity.
Right, the illusion. But as we've unpacked the locational marginal price equation, we've revealed that the true cost of power is anything but flat.
Far from it. It is a highly dynamic, localized financial settlement that occurs every 5 minutes, attempting to balance an impossible array of variables.
The formula, MCE plus MCC plus MCL plus MGHG reveals that the total price you pay for energy is the sum of general system costs, grid traffic jams, physical heat loss, and environmental compliance. It is a stunning logistical achievement.
Which leaves us with a totally different perspective to consider, especially as the grid evolves.
Yeah, where is this all heading?
Well, historically, this nodal pricing was restricted to massive power plants and major industrial buyers.
Right, the big players.
But we are moving rapidly toward a future of distributed energy resources, or TRs.
Okay, like residential stuff.
Exactly. Imagine when millions of residential homes have solar panels, battery walls, and bidirectional electric vehicles.
Wait, so every single house becomes an active participant in this market?
Exactly. If every driveway becomes a node capable of injecting power or absorbing it based on 5-minute price signals, the computational matrix of the LMP equation becomes exponentially more massive.
I can't even wrap my head around the math for that.
We won't just be optimizing 10,000 nodes. We could be optimizing tens of millions of nodes.
Which means the LMP equation moves into our living rooms.
It does. Next time you look at a power line or flip a switch, don't just think about the electricity itself. Consider that the invisible current flowing into your home is carrying a real-time, mathematically precise receipt that maps out the physical constraints, the thermodynamic heat loss, and the regulatory borders of the exact geographical path it took to reach you.
And very soon, your own home might be actively negotiating those variables.
It's an incredible future to think about.
It really is. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into LMP.PDF. Hopefully, the next time you pay that flat utility bill, you'll have a new appreciation for the wild mathematical dance happening just behind the drywall.